Greetings everyone, this is Timothy Young's the Digital Apothecary, and today I'm going to be talking about some new advancements in technology. So January is quite interesting to me because it's right off the holidays, and then we get into two major events that I think really define what people are going to talk about for the following year. So it's the CES, or Consumer Electronics Show, and then also JP Morgan has their meeting in San Francisco that's going on right now. So I'm going to talk about CES, and while CES has many things, everything from cars, computers, televisions, home technology, they also have a segment now dedicated towards health. So these are a bunch of companies that were at the event and were being mentioned. Now, I do not attend CES or JP Morgan because I don't have that kind of money or that time, to be quite honest. So I have to live vicariously through other people and what they're posting. So in the event, I'm going to talk about some of the stuff that I saw posted and people were talking about, and kind of go into detail in terms of why I think from a pharmacy perspective, this technology is kind of interesting. So first, I'm going to talk about Santa. So Santa is basically a means to address pain. So this is a non-drug intervention that's basically supposed to help you out with relaxation techniques and to help out with pain management. I think we're going to see more of this stuff. I've seen a lot from VR technology also being pushed, and I think there's some interesting studies that are coming out showing this, or they're starting. But the emphasis is basically trying to demonstrate that we can help you manage pain through different sensory means. Now, the catch is, and I'm no expert on this stuff because I have not gone into detail, and it's something that's on my radar, but I haven't done a deep dive yet because I haven't seen them really brought to market huge, is just trying to give people a means to kind of ignore their pain through different means. So we've seen this in some ERs where you can have like a VR experience, or even playing on an iPad, take your mind off of some things instead of directly going to drugs. And I kind of consider them more adjunctive treatments at this time. And I'm not too sure like what pain they're best for. Is it nociceptive? Is it neuropathic? These are things that I think are worth investigating and learning more about. But I think this kind of stuff will see more explosion in the future. Along with that there seems to be a huge expanse of just a number of sensors. So case in point, this one's from Nightwatch, and it's a armband that you wear that basically helps detect if a person is having a seizure during their sleep. As you can imagine, it's probably beneficial for children or younger adults, especially if they're in the point where they have a condition that's really hard to monitor and caregiver is really trying to keep close watch. I can see this being beneficial, especially for new diagnoses or for changes in therapy, and just trying to make sure things are meeting their clinical endpoints. I have seen some other devices in the past. They're wrist-borne as well. So this is one avenue I've seen people going into. This is Aluna. So Aluna is basically a Bluetooth-enabled spirometer. Now, these things do exist on the market. One thing I thought was kind of cool when I looked at this is that it actually has gamification built into it, trying to increase engagement with users. I'd be quite interested to see if the whole gamification market really explodes, trying to get people to be more adherent or more engaged with these types of devices, because fall-off seems to always be high. Next is Withings. So Withings announced a number of new smartwatches that have come out. I always think they're quite interesting compared to, like, let's suppose Samsung or Apple with their smartwatches, which really look tech enabled. I mean, they look techied, versus Withings and a few others like Fossil and such go for a more traditional watch look. I mean, these things look like actual watches that maybe, like, a decade or even nowadays doesn't seem out of place, but you can definitely see that they have the tech stuff thrown in there. You have alerts, you have how many steps you're taking, but also they're getting to a point where they can monitor heart rate and heart rhythm and really detecting for ECG measurements. This stuff I think is kind of key. I think from a kind of a design perspective, it'll be quite interesting in the future to see really what is going to be the standard in appearance or what's going on. So it's something on my mind. Along with that was something that was very interesting that was announced, is that MediRom is partnering with Matrix Industries to make like a health monitoring device. I mean, it's not the device itself in terms of monitoring that's really got me really attracted to this. It's the fact of the matter is that they are going to develop the first smartwatch that never needs charging by applying innovative technology like its thermoelectric generator. So one things that I think is always a limiting factor, even for me, is with wearables, is I have to charge the damn things. So if I take that into consideration, one of the issues with that then is the fact that if I want my Apple Watch to watch my sleep throughout the night, well, I know when am I going to charge it? When is the best time, because I have to take it off. So I think if you want continuous measurement, you're going to need to find some way to kind of deal with the power issues, and that could be it doesn't use as much power, has a better battery, or it gets its power from another alternative person. In this case, let's go with like the Matrix, and where their own best battery, and you can generate electricity. So I think this is really kind of cool from that perspective. I'd be very curious to see if it takes off, and if that would actually be a good utilization to kind of help direct people to use wearables more often. Because I'm looking at Samsung, in the meantime, who announced their collaboration with Kaiser Permanente, and they put out a publication that showed that with their smartwatches and such, they were basically doing home-based rehabilitation programs, and you can see right here, like, experienced just 2% readmission rates and saw a 74% improvement in completion rates compared to clinic-based programs. Reaching people in their homes and using that stuff is very valuable, and I think there's going to be a big push, but you need this technology to exist. They put a publication out in New England Journal of Medicine, Catalyst. Now, Catalyst just went more private because it's kind of almost a spinoff from the New England Journal Medicine group. So they have their inaugural post that just came out, and some good publications in there, but I'm going to have to get access to this to read it and just kind of boil it down, and then I'll probably post an article online. This is Relief Band. This is kind of interesting because it's supposed to be it's FDA cleared product that's supposed to help out with nausea, vomiting, non-pharmacological, obviously. And this looks like it's meant for people with motion disturbances, or maybe in other conditions, maybe people who are on medications that may increase their nausea, vomiting. So this one came out, and as soon as I was looking at this, a few others popped up on my Facebook post links. So there seems to be a push to develop this type of technology out there. This is very interesting compared to like those pressure point bands that a lot of pharmacies carry, especially aimed at pregnancy. So this one I thought was kind of interesting from that standpoint. So moving away from wearables, now what about smart clothing? So this is Noma, and Noma is making basically clothing that has sensors built into them. And they're supposed to basically collect a lot of vital data for people throughout the day. And as you can see, this looks almost like Tron based. If these things had LED lights that lit up, I'd be amazed. And even the things for kids. But in any event, they're supposed to detect motion and movement, and also collect other data. And I think the reality is basically you can start collecting health information from people. Who would you want this in? Maybe people with motion disturbances and due to diseases, thinking like Parkinson's or MS or things like that, so neurology. But maybe there's other things that we have to consider. Then this is Nanit. Now there's a huge explosion, I think, in baby stuff. You've probably heard of Owlet. Some pharmacies carry them, like I know CVS has them in stock, that goes on the ankle that helps detect movement and heart rate, and it's supposed to help decrease the risk for SIDS. Here we have a band that fits around the stomach. I have a toddler and I have another one on the way, and I'm very curious about this stuff. What is the best way to wear things? I kind of like this design because it fits around the belly. It doesn't come off as easy as I think something on the ankle or worn on the arms, because I think the kids just tear them off. But this is a little bit more secure, but it's kind of interesting. So I think this is kind of technology I think it's going to have a market here, especially as a lot of the millennial population are starting to have kids. So we're going to see a big push from there. The other one is that this is Skin. This is another smart clothing, and it's basically going to detect other vital data. So I feel like this whole wearable movement into clothing is something that's going to take off more. I mean, this is basically smart underwear at this point. Then we have AARP. AARP is basically trying to be a medical tricorder like a la Star Trek, and it's supposed to help monitor a lot of things. So if you look in here, you put this in your mouth and you breathe into it. It's supposed to monitor temperature, blood pressure, pulse rate, SpO2, heart rate, respiratory rate, like all that kind of stuff. And I think this is something that a lot of people want, because most homes have a thermometer in them, but most homes don't have a blood pressure meter. Most homes don't have a lot of things that are useful that if we want to go through this whole telemedicine service where we need to be able to collect objective information in the home to then be utilized, if you want to start tackling those, as I've been calling them, mid-state diseases such as hypertension and such, you need some better measurements in the home in order to do those things, and patients need a means to actually collect the data objectively and then communicate it to a provider that wants to help address those concerns. So trying to find and create this medical tricorder at home to collect all this information is very key, and I think a lot of people are trying to do it. But we've seen this push for the past decade, and not a lot of people have made anything that won. So this is still something on my radar in terms of that. But the thing with AARP is the fact that it's very breath-oriented. Now, some people have emailed me over the years just with different technology focus on what you can collect through the breath. And one of the examples that got me was people were trying to show me that you could detect what drugs were present in the body, and then from that measure adherence. So I think this is another area that's popping up that I'm kind of like interested to see where it goes. But for now, I'm just kind of hesitantly watching. Along with kid stuff is Lumi. I've talked about Lumi in the past. It's basically a baby monitoring system, and what it works through is this smart diaper. So this diaper is on there, has a little sensor and detects when it's wet. There are some benefits to that for me, basically, especially my kid had a lot of diaper rashes, and could this help out with stuff like that? Possibly. I think my wife and me did a cost analysis. It's a few dollars more than normal, and we might try it out, but I'm very interested to see where that's going. Next is Mattie. So now we're moving into the smart home stuff. So Mattie is basically a bath mat, and it collects different data for a person. So, I just want to highlight this to just show like what kind of stuff that people are trying to put out into homes. Because in older adult care, we're seeing this stuff like Essence that's making home monitors. This one's very much around safety, so you can see these jewelry stuff, early alert systems, warnings that you can do, and collect the data, and then move it off for monitoring. So you have these early alert sensors, but then you also have this like Care Predict, which is pushing like this wearable that can detect a lot of things. So this is called Temple Wearable. It can detect a lot of activities like of daily living, drinking, bathing, grooming, brushing teeth, they're saying, toileting, and where people are moving around. Like you could even have indoor location tracking. If this was used at a assisted living facility, to make sure that, like, where are people at, and it could even have like keyless door opening that can go into it. Then you have like they have a machine learning program that can detect, what people are doing throughout their entire week and such. So this may feed into basically monitoring of older adults, and it could be probably beneficial because if you know all this stuff and you start seeing these activities daily livings like decrease, why? Was it because medication changes? Was it a disease change? And it might turn to an early alert system, especially for some disease progression. Let's suppose you have a patient that got discharged from the hospital due to pneumonia, heart failure, exacerbation, whatnot. And you can see that, are they on the upswing? Or are they still going down? What is their baseline? So I think there's some value here. It's just how do you basically integrate this into care? So AARP actually had an Innovation Labs showcase, and they were talking about different things. So Fierce Healthcare has a little bit of talking about it. I feel like smart toilets is something that's definitely going to be coming out at some point. They also talked about the fact that Humana is playing with something called an H Lab and a Care Coach, and they're basically Studio H, and they're trying to really get into the whole automation area with AI, trying to do more data analysis on patients. So not only was it just wearables and devices and the smart home, but also how do we go through all this data? Next is called RedEye. Not too much on their website, but one thing I thought was interesting was the fact that this is supposed to be some kind of device that can detect blood like in the toilet and water. So this might be very valuable for people who have conditions where bleeding from the rectum. Maybe it's inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's, colitis, ulcerative colitis, or then you might be looking at people who are anticoagulants and just monitoring. I think this could be something very interesting to use, but this is another example of what people are doing for home testing. Next is Tivic Health. They came out with this thing called ClearUp. This is for sinus pain relief. As soon as I saw this one also on Facebook, I started getting hit with it. And it's a non-pharmacological treatment for basically sinus pain. They're targeted for allergic rhinitis. I think that's kind of cool because there's definitely a market here for people who have allergic rhinitis but can't use certain medications, especially pathologies like decongestants, just because maybe they have hypertension or something like that, or contraindication, or pregnancy itself. So this is, I think, non-pharmacological treatments are always out there. Neti had its heyday. I still see it. I think they got bad PR based on the fact that, what was it? People were using well water and they got brain infections, for instance. So yeah, it's something to consider. Withings also had, not Withings, we talk about Withings. This is Omron. Omron had a bunch of stuff for blood pressure. Omron came out with their heart guide, which is basically continuous or semi-continuous blood pressure monitor that was worn on the wrist. They also had a Bluetooth-enabled EKG machine along with blood pressure analysis. You put your smartphone here and you put your fingers on these leads here, and it can do an EKG for arrhythmia detection for AFib, for instance. Withings also has something that's very similar, but it's on the cuff itself, and you have to put your fingers on it. I've had previous videos talking about it. So this seems to be the standard right now. Taking into consideration, though, I think we're going further away just from measuring heart rate and such. Like Omron's continuous blood pressure measurement, we're also seeing Valence Cells. It's a cuffless blood pressure monitoring device. So there's this huge push also for blood pressure monitoring. This you can see is being worn on the arm apparently. But then we have, let me just get their name, Actio. I think that's how you say Actio, but it's another continuous blood pressure monitor that you basically wear on your wrist now. This looks very different because this looks like almost like a cuff. Like, I feel like you can make an armband for this and put it on like an Apple Watch. I wouldn't be surprised if they tried doing that, kind of like Cardia did with the first generation Apple Watch before Apple Watches actually had a built-in ECG device built in. But as you can see, it's supposed to be a device that can do blood pressure measurements. So I think this is kind of cool. I've also heard people are trying to do blood pressure measurement through the smartphone as well through their camera. So I feel like blood pressure measurement is going to be a changing dynamic soon here. I'd like to see more about the science in terms of how this stuff works in comparison to traditional blood pressure measurements done in other places and accuracy. But this is something I think I wouldn't be surprised within 5 years. Most devices also not only detected blood pressure, heart rate, ECG, but also could detect other things as well. I think this is going to be a standard. Like, just trying to go with this whole premise. If you remember what I was talking about, AARP, that breath enabled to detect all the measurements. Are we just have continuous measurement throughout the day? I think blood glucose is going to be something else that people are going to try doing, because then we get to this Airbetic. This is another wearable that's supposed to detect blood glucose, but it's based on different technology, such as basically what senses through I think like the air, if my understanding is correct, and then it basically can measure through skin and such what is blood glucose. So this is very interesting because I think this is, like I said, I think this is going to be where things are going to go. So they talk about a nano gas sensor. I have not done too much homework on this. I've seen other things like mentioning this stuff, but this was interesting for them to come out really big at CES and talk about their stuff. Lastly, getting away from almost all that stuff, I thought this was cool. This is Bali. It's this little guy. I would highly recommend you watch a video of him. I think it's very cool. It's almost an Amazon Alexa that rolls on wheels and follows you around. I could see this being benefit, especially for people at home. You guys have probably seen me talk about my Vector robot. But, here's a little robot that follows you around, that can control your smart home, it can communicate with you and watch you. I think this could be very valuable, especially for some older adults, especially as a tool to have in their home to help just see if everything's going well and you can kind of key in on it. So I think the whole smart home is going to really pull off here soon. So in any event, this is the stuff that I think is really cool. If JP Morgan has anything that's really big to talk about, I'll make a video about them. But in the past, it's kind of like, for them, it's just like word of mouth of what's going to discuss. CES, at least the benefit is most of these companies have websites you can look at and see what their technology is. But overall, this is Timothy Else, the Digital Apothecary, and I hope you enjoyed this video just talking about different stuff that I think is really cool and we should really consider in terms of how it's going to impact our patient care. So have a good day, and thank you.